it's Ivy Slater, and you're listening to Her Success Story podcast, a show where gutsy businesswomen share their success journey. Hi, this is Ivy Slater. Welcome to today's episode of Her Success Story. I am thrilled. Well, her success story is so often you think it's only women, but that's not true here at Her Success Story. Her Success Story is about great leaders who have navigated amazing things and have shared stories, experiences to tell. Today's guest is Dr. Alan Lycka. At the top of his career, he was told he had 6 months to live. He was a world-leading cosmetic dermatologist in 2003 when he was crushed by this misdiagnosis. He defined the odds and learned to thrive. When a person survives death, they change. They look at life differently and seek out answers. Because of his struggle, he was then able to actually write a book that I have been incredibly impressed with, I must say, called The Secrets of Living a Fantastic Life: The 13 Golden Pearls Within. Dr. Alan, thank you for joining me here today. It is every time I have a conversation with you, I struggle to hang up the phone, the Zoom, because it's so interesting. So thank you for joining me here on Her Success Story and sharing more of your story, your wisdom, and your charm with our listeners.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here, Ivy. Thank you so much for inviting me.
So you were a doctor, a dermatologist, big in cosmetic. Give a little bit of this background because you're a big deal.
Well, let me go through it. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I was in med school, but then one day, when I was taking my training, I went to a dermatologist's office and I said, "Geez, this is exactly what I want to do the rest of my life." So I ended up applying to hundreds of schools. And I was rejected by all of them the first year. And then the second year, I was accepted by almost a dozen of them. So it was a long process. And I ended up going to the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I studied there for 3 years. Now, dermatology back then was a lot different than it is now. I mean, back then we used to do warts and psoriasis and acne and things like that. But, when I was in dermatology, one of the first lasers was invented for the use in dermatology. And just as I got out of my training, something strange called Botox was invented by Alistair and Jean Carruthers in Vancouver, British Columbia. Jean was an ophthalmologist and Alistair was a dermatologist. And he walked in on one of Jean's patients and Jean was using it for treating something called strabismus, which means squint eye. And he asked the patient, "What do you like about this stuff?" And the patient said, "All my wrinkles go away." So all of a sudden, Alistair jumped on this and it became one of the biggest used products in the world, if not the biggest used product. I mean, who doesn't want their wrinkles to go away with a simple little injection? And so Alistair, I learned from Alistair the week that he came on, he said, "Dr. Lycka, you got to get onto this stuff. It's the best stuff since sliced bread." So, we had to play with it. We had to get the dosing right. We had to find out about it. And I started with that. And then lasers became better and better and better. So I started doing lasers. And back in those days, a new technique of liposuction was invented. See, in the old days, liposuction used to be done under general anesthesia. So people had to be put to sleep for it. Well, one of my friends, Jeffrey Klein in San Capistrano, California, invented a way to do it under local anesthesia. And that was called tumescent anesthesia. So he taught a lot of people. He taught me how to do it, and I started to do it. And by the time I had finished my career in dermatology, I had done about 10,000 cases of liposuction.
Wow.
So it became a big thing because people.
So you really were on the early stages of when the good old fashioned dermatologist that I went to as a kid because, I had a pimple, you, transitioned into the dermatology so many of us know today in the cosmetic dermatology. And then, I actually, it was almost funny because a client of mine said something recently because uh, so much of wearing masks, I'm hearing a lot of people's faces are breaking out. And I noticed
Oh, yeah.
and they're like, do you know a dermatologist who actually does, like who could help me because my skin's dry, my skin's breaking out around my, from not what we think of anymore.
No, and dermatologists are all trained in the same school. So many dermatologists, even though I was doing a lot of the cosmetic surgery, I would still do all the rest of the things. I would do skin cancer surgery as well, and a lot of that as well, because all of that was necessary, and all of that was really an important thing. And I found it was a very wonderful career, and I was able to really get immersed into it and have a lot of fun doing it. And I really like to help people. That problem with mask dermatitis is something that we call perioral dermatitis, which means the rash around the mouth. Well, where are people wearing these masks? Well, around the mouth. So people get all these they breathe into the mask, moisture gets under there, and then little bits of yeast and little bits of bacteria get in there, which causes all this dermatitis that everybody's getting in this day and age. So it's frustrating that the things we had to get into to protect ourselves from this terrible virus also caused a lot of other problems.
Yeah. So I can only imagine in 2003, when you got a diagnosis.
Well, let's go into that diagnosis and how it came about. My wife and I were walking in Disneyland, of all places, the happiest place on earth.
The
We were there,
happiest place on
the
earth.
happiest place
You know,
on earth.
and listeners, just so Alan said, Disneyland, and it immediately a big smile comes on my face. You can't even see it, but picture it, because you say Disneyland and I think Mickey Mouse. I wear a Mickey Mouse. My watch is a Mickey Mouse,
Absolutely.
right? It's the happiest place on earth. So true.
Absolutely. And, it was the end of a hot, sticky day. It was February, but it was like really warm, like 90, 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And it was humid and sweaty. And my wife turned to me and said, "What's wrong with you?" I said, "What do you mean, what's wrong with me? I haven't said anything wrong. I haven't done anything wrong. I haven't even thunk anything wrong. What do you mean, what's wrong with me?" She said, "What is wrong with you?" I said, "I really don't know what you're talking about." She said, "Listen to your foot." I said, "What do you mean, listen to your foot?" That's one of the funniest expressions you've ever told me. Well, she said, "Listen to it." Well, my right foot had suddenly and mysteriously developed a right foot drop. It was slapping on the pavement with each step I was taking.
Wow.
It wasn't lifting. Ivy, your brain is designed to lift your foot up with every step you're taking. It's designed automatically to do that. But my right foot wasn't doing it. So my wife said, "Did you have a stroke?" And I said, "Dear, you're a doctor. I'm a doctor. If I had a stroke, I'd probably be lying on the pavement here saying something unintelligible." And she said, "Well, there's something wrong with you. When we get back, you better get this checked out." Well, when your significant other tells you to get something checked out, what do you do?
You go to get it checked out.
Exactly. So I got back and I saw dozens, if not hundreds of doctors. They did CAT scans, they did brain scans, they even did scans, I'm sure. And at the end of the day, you know what they showed?
What?
Absolutely nothing. Nothing. These doctors thought I had a brain tumor, or they thought I might have had a slipped disc, or they thought I might have had something they might have been able to nail it down.
Right.
Now, Ivy, when a doctor finds nothing, you know what they do?
I'm almost afraid to ask.
The answer is they do more tests and more tests
Yeah.
and more tests because they got to find the answer, right?
We have to find what the root of the problem is.
they
We
gotta
can't
find,
just,
and I think they even invented some tests just to do the tests at that time. And again, at the end of it, they couldn't find anything wrong. So they sent me to see a world leading neurologist. You know, a neurologist is the brain guy, the
yep.
guy that's got all the answers. He's supposed to have all the answers when all the other things. So I walked in and I said, hi. He said, hi back. You better be sitting down when I tell you this. I said, why? What's wrong? He said, you have ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. Get your affairs in order. In 6 months, you're going to be dead. I
Wow.
said, what? I got a dropped right foot. Is there a way to prove this diagnosis? He said, of course, on autopsy.
Wow.
Guy had no bedside manner whatsoever, none.
Clearly, he missed that class in med school.
Yeah, so I shot back at him. I'm not going to die to prove you wrong. I'm simply not going to go there. But, you know, I left the office. I slammed the door. I was angry as anything. And, you know, when you go through a process like this, you go through a grief reaction, Ivy, and you go through anger. You literally can bite the head off nails. And I was angry. I was so angry at the world. I mean, how could this happen? I'm young. I can't be dying yet. You go through bargaining. Oh, God, please don't let this happen. I'll do anything.
Make this not be true.
Yes, you go through denial. There's nothing wrong. You know, I'm still healthy. Maybe this drop foot isn't real, but you know, at the same time, my right hand started not working right, and I had to do things to make that work right as well. And you know, as it started, my right hand even became more and more progressively wrong. Now, the good news is I became left-handed, and I could do things with my left hand that I could never do with my right. So I was able to keep on going with my surgeries and things like that. You know, surgery is a right-handed thing. So I had to invent tools that, because there weren't left-handed scissors back there for surgery. There weren't any of these left-handed instruments. So I had to invent them. And then the last thing you go through is you go through depression. Ivy, have you ever been depressed?
No.
Good, because it's the worst thing in the world. That's where you lay in bed all day, not wanting to move. The world is black. The world is terrible. You don't eat. You don't sleep. You just don't have a reason to live. Okay. And it's terrible when a person really gets depressed. I can see why people kill themselves when they're depressed, because really everything is so black. They want relief from that black space. So I went to my wife then, and I said to my wife, what do I have? And she said, I haven't got the faintest idea, but you're smart. You can figure it out.
So she opened the door. So you didn't accept it. She didn't accept it. And that was the catalyst to opening the door to not surrendering.
Yes, that was the catalyst to get me through it. And you know, back in 2003, 2005, when all this was going on, something new was invented. It's called the internet. You ever hear of that, Ivy?
Probably around the time I actually had, I was still a printer at the time. And yes, we had computers at that point, but it took a while.
But you know, back then, the only way you could get on the internet was with dial-on connections.
100%.
And your phone would connect with another phone, and it would go ria, ria, ria for something like 15 minutes. And finally, after this eternity, it would connect. And when it would connect, you'd get onto another computer, and you'd have to communicate with something like a language called DOS or another primitive language, because there were no memory in computers. They had 64 bits. They really had nothing in which they could communicate like we do now on a daily basis. So we really had to use all this other stuff. Thank goodness I had friends that were nerds and they could get me on.
So what did you find? And how did you start turning this around?
My friends that were nerds started to search for things, and they found a doctor in Colorado Springs, Colorado, by the name of David Martz. And David had a story very similar to mine, but he got worse much more rapidly. And after a couple of weeks, he was on his deathbed, and he couldn't lift his head from his pillow. People had said, "You've got Lou Gehrig's disease, you're going to die." Well, people from around the world were coming to say goodbye to David because he was so well known in his field. And so a doctor came up from Texas, a Dr. Harvey, and he looked at David and said, "David, I don't think you have ALS. I don't think you have Lou Gehrig's disease." David whispered, because that's all he could do at that time. He said, "What do I have?" The doctor from Texas says, "I think you have something called chronic Lyme's disease. I think you've been bitten by a tick, and it's a disease that mimics Lou Gehrig's disease." And he said, "And if I'm right, I can start you on treatment and you will get rapidly better." Well, David said, "What do I have to lose? I'm dying. If I don't get something done here, I'm a goner. So do whatever you did." And after, immediately, he was like Lazarus arising from the dead. He really could do everything. He could do everything. So I knew I had to get in touch with David. And so I phoned every hospital in Colorado Springs, Colorado. You see, any doctor can get in touch with any other doctor if he wants to. All he has to do is get on the phone the hospital operator, tell him who he is, and they'll call you back. Simple as that. Well, I got in touch with David and we talked for hours. And he said, Dr. Lycka, since I had that episode, he said, I've started a clinic treating people with this weird disease. He said, I've got over 2,000 patients with it. I said, really? He said, yeah. He said, why don't you come down and see me? And I said, when? He said, right now. I said, David, I can't. He said, why? He said, it's Thanksgiving in Canada. My wife's invited over 50 people over. She won't let me go. He said, aren't there any planes in Canada? He didn't let me off that easily.
So once you went and you started treatment, I want to, because I too want to like get to the book here.
Yeah.
What was, when you have that truly looking death in the mirror moment, and you were a dedicated doctor your whole life, you were doing beautifully. It's not easy to write a book, Alan.
No, it's not.
And it's not easy to write a book from your heart. And so much of this book has so much of you in it. So yes. What was the turning point, and what did you learn when you started writing it, when you started, looking at what the 13 golden pearls within?
Well, let me just tell you about that, okay? Because once you go through and meet death in the eye, you really wonder if you've really done all you could. You really wonder if you've given enough back. You really wonder if you've lived. You really wonder if you've loved. You really wonder if you mattered. All these things that you do from your daily day, did you really make a significant difference? And so I met my co-author, Harriet Tinka, because I was sponsoring an award for the Women of Distinction for the YWCA. And Harriet had a story similar to mine, but different. But the point is, we ended up writing this book based on our experiences. And we found these 13 golden pearls that are inside of every one of us. These 13 golden pearls are really what we're made out of. They're all the things that make a person unique in what they are. And a pearl is formed because of trauma. A little grain of sand gets inside of an oyster and forms a pearl. So we decided to call these little pearls of wisdom what they are, pearls of wisdom, and make them that way. Now, it's not hard to write, Ivy. All you have to do is slit your wrists and bleed. And that's basically what it is to write. You really have to put it all on the line. You really have to bare your soul and be naked out there for everybody. And that's what it's all about.
It's very true. I know. I swore I would never write my first book, and I'm currently in the third. So I'm still seem to be bleeding on some carpet in my home.
Yes, you haven't learned from the first episode. You have to do it again and again and again. You're a slow learner, Ivy.
Oh, I know. So if you would share one of those, where we only have a couple of minutes left, one of those pearls.
Well, let me tell you a little story. There was a carpenter, and his name was Fred. And Fred just didn't have it left in him anymore. He'd worked for the same company for the last 40 years. And he went to his boss and said to his boss, I'm done. I just can't do this any longer. The boss said, Fred, you can't do this to me. You've been my main carpenter all these years. What am I going to do without you? And he said, can you do just one more thing for me? The boss said. And Fred, of course, said, yes, of course. I've loved it here. I'll do whatever you want me to. And he said, just build me one more house, and I'll be happy. Okay, so Fred did it, but he didn't have the enthusiasm anymore. He dragged his arse to work every day and just barely got the job done. And at the end of it, he threw the keys on the boss's desk and said, I'm out of here. The boss said, hold it. We're going to have a big party. And they gathered everybody around in the office. They popped the champagne. They had the caviar. And the boss said, okay, everybody, this is Fred's last day. He's going to be very happy, but I'm going to be very sad. I wish all of you would work like he did all the days of his life. Now, I've got a special gift for Fred. Fred, here's the keys to the last house you ever built. May you live in it with all the enthusiasm you did all the days of your life. This is one of the golden pearls, Ivy. Enthusiasm. It's one of the keys to make the world what it's all about. With enthusiasm, you turn every day into a very special day. You turn it into a day that's marvelous. You turn a day that could be otherwise gray and gloomy, noisy as in your apartment, too hot in your apartment, but enthusiasm carries you through.
It's true. When we wake up with an enthusiasm to live, an enthusiasm for a life, the appreciation for all the little things, it gives us so much more in our daily existence.
Absolutely. And that's what makes it what it is.
Yeah. I had a client say to me earlier, she goes, you have this crazy knack, Ivy, she goes, no matter what I throw at you, you find a positive to it. I was like, sure I do. And she's like, how do you do that? I said, because why not? There's a positive everywhere if we're willing to look for it. There's been plenty of positive and silver linings from the pandemic. Are we willing to see them? I had the pleasure of being on your podcast.
Yes.
I so want to call it It's a Wonderful Life, but it's the secrets to living a fantastic life. But, when we talk, you represent It's a Wonderful Life, and it's the secrets to living a fantastic life. Alan, tell us a little bit about that podcast.
My podcast is now syndicated. It's on 17 radio shows now, and it's also on 10 live streaming stations. So it's literally heard by millions right now. It's called How to Live a Fantastic Life. And, it's growing by leaps and bounds. And several times a week, I interview somebody that's special, somebody that has something amazing about themselves, somebody that shares what makes their life fantastic. And that's why I love the show, because it gives people other pearls from other people's wisdom on how to make their life fantastic too.
Well, Alan, you have a beautiful touch on making every person you touch's lives a little bit more fantastic in every moment. So thanks for joining me here on Her Success Story. How could our listeners learn more about you and follow you, Alan?
Just get to my website, www.drallen, Lycka, Lycka.com. dralanlycka.com. Hope to talk to you soon.
And Dr. Alan Lycka, thank you for joining me here on Her Success Story. Listeners, here's how we close this show. You ready? Take a moment, take a deep breath. What is your biggest takeaway? What was the aha? What was the meaningful moment from listening today? What resonated with you? Take that in, digest it, put it in the notes. Say, this is what I took away. This really meant something to me. And here's the key. This is what I'm going to do about it. This is what I'm going to take it and do about it to live a fantastic life for myself. Then join us and hit subscribe every week as we come into your wonderful podcast apps at Her Success Story on every Monday morning. Please, if this episode meant something to you, share it forward. Let it mean something to many, many more. Thank you for joining us here today.